We at ET Now from the RBI website have analyzed payment transactions, the transaction values from March 2021 and May 2021. What we have figured out from there, and very interesting data points and insights to talk about, is that RTGS, NEFT, credit cards, debit cards, or the transaction values are all down in this period from anywhere from 30 to 40%, whereas UPI is down only 2.8%. What has made UPI so resilient? How has it outperformed the other payment modes? Joining me to talk about that is the NPCI COO, Praveena Rai, who has agreed very kindly to do this interview. Ms. Rai, always a pleasure talking to you. My first question to you is, how are you folks interpreting this data? It's not as if, the transaction values for UPI are not down, but when you just compare it to the other modes, particularly NEFT and RTGS, which is so popular with big businesses, what do you make of it?
So I think this is clearly indicating that UPI has become part of day-to-day life of a number of users who are the users of UPI. So last year, during the lockdown period, similar time frame, we would have seen about a 19 to 20% dip, whereas this year it's practically flat, just around in the range of 2.5%. And here we have seen this growth in volume and the resilience across all banking categories. So not just the large commercial banks, including the cooperative banks that have all gone live on UPI. We have nearly 170 banks that are live on UPI. The volume has been consistent all through. So a number of people have started using UPI. They have heard from friends and family, and they feel that it is very convenient, very safe, it's instantaneous. So somebody, before they just start working from home, are able to finish their grocery payments or, able to finish whatever they need to do without really having to even step out. So I think all of that is coming together and making UPI practically a habit in people's day-to-day life today.
So what do you think changed between wave 1 and wave 2? In wave 1, the strictest lockdown on this planet, which was announced by the center, unlike this year when it was done by states, it was partial lockdowns, etc. UPI has obviously fared better. I'm sure even you remember those headlines like yesterday from last year, how UPI is down 30%, 40%.
So, I think the big difference is in the last 1 year, a number of people have started using UPI who were not users earlier. A number of people who were infrequent users of UPI have started using UPI for all their transactions. So we meet a number of people in our day-to-day life, in our research. We come across a large swath of population which is actually saying, I actually don't even carry cash anymore. I'm just carrying my phone, and whatever I need to do, I'm able to make the transaction on UPI. So the acceptance of UPI across nearly all merchant categories. The last year, I think, when lockdown happened, is when people started actually telling their breadwala and their vegetable vendors and all the small merchants with whom they interact on a day-to-day basis. Actually, consumers got merchants onto UPI. Both to help the merchant as well as to help themselves. And this has really created the users of UPI who today don't think twice, right? And these are all essential services that have come onto UPI. Now, what we're also seeing is, the use of the UPI ID. So again, last year, I think we were in a phase where people would think, if I use a particular app, whether it's a payment app or a banking app, unless the other party has the same app, I may not be able to make a transaction. So that has changed, and the understanding of the UPI ID as a common factor. If I have my UPI ID, anyone using any bank app, using any payment app will be able to make a payment. So that again has been a big enabling factor. We also see a trend where certain, merchant categories, when I look at this year, and this is expected, right? So you see retail, restaurants, dining, fuel. So these are some of the categories, that are having a bit of a lower usage. But categories around grocery, categories around OTT, cable TV, mobile recharge. These are all being heavily used, and really kind of driving some of the usage up on that sort of day-to-day use for in the life of a customer. What we are also doing this year, which I think is very tuned to the needs of users in Wave 2, is enabling the entire healthcare ecosystem. So while they are all enabled on UPI, last year we had number of small merchants who had QRs, but nobody was visiting the shop personally, so they started getting enabled on what is called link-based payment. You take the order on the phone, the merchant is able to send a link, the customer is able to make a payment, and the transaction is done, and whatever has been ordered is delivered to the home. So that's already in place, right? And it's working perfectly well. But we realized this year with the healthcare system, when somebody is getting a diagnostic test, is it a RT-PCR test, or is it any other kind of a test happening in the residence? Then these kind of very convenient payment mechanisms had not yet been enabled. So we really looked at it, working with the ecosystem, hospitals, diagnostic centers, pharmacies, clinics. These are the categories where there has been a incremental focus this year, which has also started creating some sort of an impact. We are seeing some extra incremental volumes happening in those categories, and there is some more work to be done there.
Okay, so those would be obvious tailwinds if during a pandemic you start allowing and integrating healthcare services. But Ms. Rai, I also want to ask you one question, which is, and this was our interpretation, that RTGS, NEFT are predominantly used by large businesses, mid to large businesses. That's not UPI's customer base, if I can call it that. Credit card, debit card, I can understand, discretionary spend in a pandemic, the second wave was more deadly. Would that be a correct conclusion?
So UPI has both segments. It is used
because it's scary. Because it's scary if NEFT and RTGS is down 30 to 40%. Because the point is, Rai, if NEFT and RTGS is down 30 to 40%, it indicates the indications are not good for the economy. It sends a bad signal as such. From that perspective, an indicator of the economy.
So I think what that is telling you is what's happening on the B2B sector, right? So those are slightly larger value payments happening probably in the supply chain of a manufacturing concern or a large distribution chain. But largely, if you look at where UPI stands, these are more retail transactions. It could be a business paying refunds back to the customer on the payment side, or of course, consumers making payments for all their day-to-day use. So there is a certain difference in the way both these categories operate. One is more business-driven, one is more retail and consumer-driven. But if the consumer demand is healthy, and that's what we are seeing through these transactions, then there will be a backward impact in the supply chain. So I think we should see that in the months to come, in the way how that plays out in all the payment systems.
UPI, of course, has been applauded globally from, even the Google chief, Sundar Pichai, Satya Nadella of Microsoft, all of that. But, since I have you on the show, Mr. Rai, I'd like to ask you that where will the next wave of growth come for UPI, even in the terms of number of users? You've got a game changer of sorts from the RBI allowing interoperability. You did allude to that also in one of the answers. But how will you grow, or would you say it's also hitting a plateau of sorts?
Oh no, I think it's nowhere near hitting a plateau. There are still large swaths of the country where we still need to have UPI users come on board. If you look at mobile phone users, the smartphone users, I believe we have addressed a large part of that population. A research that we did earlier in the year in 2020. The NPCI price research, that showed us 1/3 of households in the country are using UPI, including 25% from the lower income households. So while that's great news, we still have segments associated with feature phones. We still have segments associated with people who are not yet as aware and not yet using UPI. Right? There's a big awareness story that is still to be solved for. And all of these are what we're looking at as we're looking at the new use cases. And I think, whatever we are doing on the healthcare segment is also going to be one of the enablers that we're alluding to. International is, you've already spoken about it. The NPCI, International Private Limited, is the entity that NPCI has formed, and the objective of this entity is really to take the UPI story global. That's in very early stage, and a number of conversations are in play there. And as things play out, we'll be able to share more about that.
The new RBI mandate allowing interoperability, what is that going to mean for the wallets, and what is it also going to mean for UPI? Can this be the commercial moment of UPI?
So the wallets, amongst banks, you already have the large commercial banks, you have the small finance banks, the payment banks, the cooperative banks, and the rural banks, right? And we have pretty much this entire ecosystem that's operating on UPI today. It's a great story, and we are really very excited about having PPIs come and join on board for UPI. PPIs amongst themselves, cater to a large swath of the country. So people tend to have bank accounts, but still there are certain purposes for which they prefer to operate out of a wallet. And the interoperability will give the convenience. It will give merchants the reach of this large base. It will also give the consumers the reach for a number of digital payments that they will be able to make. So I think it will be a multiplier to the depth and reach that UPI has today. So it will be one of the big trigger elements in 2021.
And not competing organizations that are being flanked by the RBI, for which bids and all have been submitted. That's something else that NPCI will have to deal with, and UPI will also have to compete with.
That's right. I think we'll do that when the time comes.
Okay, Ms. Praveena Rai, you promised me 10 minutes, and thank you so much for that. I think I've crossed the time limit that you had given me. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much. There you get to know, ladies and gentlemen, why UPI has been more resilient than the other payment modes, and the way forward as well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.